Hi, this is Simon Obstall and welcome to another tutorial for Resolve Fusion. And today we're going to be diving back into expressions to create this simple but effective scene. So, quite a few interesting things about this project, and I think it's time we got started. So to set up this basic animation, there is actually a very simple way of doing it, and you may well have already guessed it. And if you haven't guessed it, I'll tell you what it is at the end. But what I actually wanted to do here was have a more intense workout with expressions, because I think that's always worth doing. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to bring in a 3D shape. And let's look at that. Let's choose sphere. Let's use the defaults, come to the material. I just want to make this not fully opaque, and let's just make it a funky color. And then let's copy and paste that. Let's merge the two things together. Look at the result. This second sphere, let's set its radius to 0.1. Let's make it white again. So what we want to be able to do is to animate this sphere in an arc around the large sphere. So I've just renamed those two. I've renamed the large sphere as bowl, because that's what we're going to be using eventually, and the small sphere as ball. So we need to animate the ball using an expression, and we're going to use cosine and sine. So let's just add an expression to the x translation of this ball, and let's make that cos, open brackets, 0, close brackets. Let's add an expression to the y translation and make that sine, open brackets, 0, close brackets. Now, as you probably know, sine and cosine will actually give you the xy coordinates based on the value of theta, which is 0 in this case, and that puts the ball here on this edge. And we can just vary this value to move the ball around the perimeter of our larger sphere. So I'm going to do this not in here, but with a kind of control node. And the control node I'm going to use is the custom tool. And I'm just going to rename that as C, lowercase, like that. Just going to make life a little bit easier. And then I'm going to come into the config, and I'm just going to set up these number controls. So the first one is going to be called speed, the second one is going to be called arc, and the third one is going to be called offset. And I'm going to turn off everything else except number 8. So when we come back, it looks like that. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to come back to my ball, and I'm going to use c.number, capital IN 8 as the variable there. And I'm just going to copy that, paste it into the y expression, and change the cos to a sine. So now if we come back to our C, we can just move the ball around the perimeter of the sphere using that number in 8 value. So let's set up our arc. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add an expression to this number in 8. So add an expression, and I'm going to type a sine, open brackets, and time divided by, and then I'm going to pick whip the speed, and I'm going to close the brackets. So let's just set that speed to something like 12. And now if I press play, you can see that our ball is rotating in an arc like that. So we want to be able to control the amount of the arc, and we can do that in the following way. We want to put a bracket before our original sign here, and then after it we want to type times, and we want to open brackets, we want to type pi, pi, times, and then we want to pick whip our arc value there, and we want to close the brackets and close the brackets. So now our arc value is going to determine the distance that the arc travels. So if we have an arc of 1, you'll see that it travels all the way around the circle. If we have an arc of 0.5, it does a semicircle like that. Our arc is going to actually be something like 0.25, but you see we've got complete control over that just with that simple control there. But for our purposes, we want these balls to be rolling around at the bottom of the bowl, and at the moment it's kind of on the side here. So what we need to do is we need to add in an offset. So after the end of our expression, we're going to type plus, and we're going to open brackets, and again we're going to type pi times, and then we're going to pick whip our offset value there, and we're going to close the brackets. And now with that offset, we can move the arc around the circle. So if I, for example, I type 0.5 for the arc, you can see that we've got the top segment there. If I type 1, we've got this left-hand segment. Obviously 0 gave us this right-hand segment. So by elimination, negative 0.5 is going to give us the bottom segment that we want. So we've set up a really useful rig here to create our animation. So the only thing we need to do is we need to make our bowl. So let's just come to our bowl and the controls, and what we can do is we can just change the latitude here, the latitude start. Maybe negative 40 is good for that. And we also want to make the bowl a little bit larger so that it accommodates the ball that sits inside it. So let's go for 1.1, because 0.1 was the dimensions of the ball. And now you can see that that ball is rolling around very nicely inside our bowl. So I've accidentally chopped off the bottom of this bowl, which I didn't mean to do, because I moved this latitude end. So that actually wants to be negative 90, so it's nice and round on the bottom. So I actually want this bowl to have some thickness. So to achieve that, I'm going to add after it a duplicate 3D. I'm going to set the scale to 1.1, and then I'm going to set the Y offset to 0.075. Then what I want to do is I want to create a rim around the edge that's a little bit thicker. And I'm going to do that by adding in a new 3D shape. Let's just merge it over the duplicate there, so we've got our bowl complete. So what we want to do is we want to switch to torus. We want to set the radius to 0.9. Let's have some extra base subdivisions. Let's go for 60. Let's come to the transform. Let's open up the scale. I want to set that Y scale to 0.25. And then I'm just going to set the Y translation to negative 0.7. I need to come back to the controls here, and we need to reduce this section, I think probably down to 0.1. So now if we switch to the perspective view, actually we want to reduce that section even more. Let's go for something like 0.05 on that. I think that is going to be more like I had in mind. So then let's just give this some materials. So I'm going to add a fast noise, and then I'm going to add a Phong shader and pipe the fast noise into the Phong, obviously. So we want to treat our bowl as one single object. So after that merge that we've created there with adding the rim, we're going to add a replace material, and we're going to pipe the Phong into the replace material like so. So the other thing that's gone wrong is the mapping. So you can see the mapping all looks pretty weird here. Actually, I'm just going to increase this fast noise scale because I actually want it to be kind of like speckling. So I'm going to come and set that scale to something like 300. But you can see that the mapping is all a bit messed up. So after this merge here and before the replace materials, I'm going to add in a UV map node. I'm going to switch to cube map. I'm going to hit fit, and I'm going to hit X, and you can see the mapping is a little bit better now. What we also need to do is come back to our original bowl shape, and we need to up these base subdivisions because you can see it's all a bit sort of jagged here. So let's go for 60 for those base subdivisions, and we've smoothed everything off. So now, having created our Phong, we can apply it to our ball as well. So let's just drag it onto the ball like so. And then really all we need to do is set up the camera and the lighting. So I'm going to grab this 3D merge here. I'm going to add in a 3D camera. Let's come to the transform. Let's add an expression to the Z pivot. So add an expression to the Z pivot. Let's pick whip the Z translation. And let's add a negative sign to the front of that. I'll explain why in a second. Then let's add a 3D renderer after the merge and have a look at what we've got. So what we need to do is we need to move our camera out. So let's go for something like 6 on Z, move it down a bit on Y, and possibly just sort of rotate over on X like that, so we're looking down into the bowl. And the advantage of having set up the pivot like this is that we can now actually rotate around the bowl using that Y rotation. And it all makes life very, very easy because we're rotating about the center of this scene. So obviously our fast noise is giving us a transparent material, and what we can do is come back into its color and just set the alpha for this color 1 to 1, and now it's solid. So then of course we need to add some lighting. So I'm going to add a spotlight, and I'm going to add it to this merge here. And we obviously need to set this renderer to have lighting and shadows, and I'm going to go with the hardware renderer here. I'm going to come back to the spotlight. I'm going to move it up 1 on Y, 5 on Z, and you'll notice that the interior of the bowl is completely black, and that's because we need to come back to our Phong, and we need to switch to two-sided lighting, and so that's looking better there. So we just need to adjust our spotlight. I'm just going to rotate it a little bit on X, so that's just a few degrees till we're actually lighting the inside of the bowl like so. So then let's create a floor by adding a new 3D shape. Plane is good. Let's pipe it into our 3D merge there. Let's come to the transform. Let's set the X rotation to -90. Let's set this Y position to -1.15. And let's set the scale to something like 30. My spotlight's a little bit too close. I'm just going to go for 6 there, so it's illuminating a little bit more the floor around. This is the floor here. Quickly rename it. Let's set its diffuse color to a nice dark gray like that. I want to set up an animation for my camera, so I'm going to set my timeline to be something like 239. So that's 10 seconds at 24 frames. So come to the transform from the camera, start value of 140, hit a keyframe, come to the end and set that to, I think, 240. And so now we're rotating around like that. So the other thing we want to do obviously is we want to have more than one ball in the bowl. So let's grab our ball, let's add a duplicate 3D, let's set the instances to 5. Let's have a rotation, I think, on Y of 30, and we want a time offset. So I think the right number is probably going to be something like 5. Let's have a look at that. So now they're rotating around and not actually colliding with each other. Now you're probably going to say it doesn't actually look as though the spheres are in proper contact with the surface of the bowl. But you actually know that's not true. You know that we actually got the balls to sit absolutely perfectly against the contour of the bowl. So what's actually going on here? Well, the answer is the approximation that we're getting from the spotlight here. And if we come to the controls, it's down to this shadow map size, but basically. So if we doubled the shadow map size to sort of 4096, you'll see we're getting a slightly better result. But you see it's still not really looking right. It still kind of look very floaty. We can improve that a little bit with ambient occlusion. So let's, at the end of our renderer, let's add an ambient occlusion. We obviously need to take the camera and pipe it into the ambient occlusion camera's input like that for it all to work. Let's have a look at what we've got. You'll see that's disabled, and that's because with our renderer we need to come to the output channels and turn on Z and normal. Now you see we can actually see our ambient occlusion there like that. Let's switch to sphere. I think is going to give us some more of what we need. And what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to reduce this kernel radius right down till we're just really sort of getting the balls. So maybe let's go for 0.25, and we're kind of just adding a sort of contact shadow to the balls. So then if we switch to color and just bypass that, you can see they're looking a lot more as though they're in the bowl. It's not completely convincing, but I think it will do. So now you're probably noticing that at a certain point our bowl looks as though it's floating because this shadow is not really working properly at all. So we can come back to our spotlight and let's just crank the density all the way up to 1 so that shadow is completely black, and that's going to work better. It's probably going to help with the balls as well. Also, we're going to just switch the light spotlights to linear, and I'm just going to adjust the decay rate till I get the looks that I want. Don't want to burn out those highlights too much. I think we need to adjust the specularity of this floor, so let's just reduce that intensity just so it's not burning out quite so much, like that. And I'm just going to add in a bit of a fill light, so I'm going to add a 3-point light, bring it into the merge. So our spotlight position was at +6 on Z. Let's move our point light back the other way, so like maybe -5 on Z. And let's just, I don't know, just change the color up a little bit. I think I'm just going to reduce the blue down so we've got a little bit of yellowy warmth in there. And again, I'm going to switch to linear and just play with the decay rate till it's just giving us a little bit of fill like that. And for some color contrast, let's come back to our spotlight and go the other way, reduce the red, reduce the green a bit as well. So we've got a nice contrast between those two lights. So I've probably spent a lot more time on the look than I actually intended. I want to just finally come back to the really simple solution for animating the ball, and as I say, you probably already guessed it. So I'm going to just make a copy of this original ball here, paste it, and bypass those two, the ball and the duplicate. Take my new ball and put it into the merge. We're going to come over to transform. We're going to remove these expressions here and set everything to the default. So the trick is that we are going to open up the pivot and we're going to add an expression to the Y, and we're going to pick whip the Y translation like so, and we're going to add a negative sign to the front, and then we're going to set that Y translation to be -1. And now if we animate the Z, you can see that we've actually very, very simply set up exactly the same thing. So what we can then do is add an expression to the Z. So we can do sine, open brackets, time divided by 12, close brackets, and multiply it by 40. And you'll see we've got effectively the same animation. And we could take that ball, pipe it into that duplicate instead, turn it back on again, and then look at our final result, and you can see that it's the same deal. I just need to add that Fong to our new ball like that. So there you go, we could have done the whole thing much more simply, but I don't think one should pass up any opportunity to get a bit more acquainted with sine and cosine and what you can do with expressions. So anyway, I hope that's been useful. Thanks very much indeed for watching. I'll see you again soon.